Hello and welcome back to the Silent but Obedient podcast. This is the first video for our new series, Defense of America. Today's topic is going to be racism in America. This isn't the easiest topic to cover, but I'll do my best. So, without further ado, Defense of America, Part 1. So, slavery existed in America from 1619 to 1865. But what did the founders do about it? The founders understood that slavery was a moral evil, that it was wrong on principle, that it was by definition an injustice. Hamilton and Madison both referred to slaves as men. This is a critical insight because if slaves are men, if slaves are human, that means that they have inalienable natural rights. And that means that slavery can only rest on the basis of positive law, as opposed to negative law, and they understood it as such. Thomas Jefferson, in one of his most famous statements on slavery to come from the American founding, explains that slavery is at war with human nature and with justice. He says it's bad for slaves because it teaches them to hate their country, and it teaches them to lack self-assertion, but it's also bad because it teaches masters to become tyrants. And the thing about that is that, see, if you treated your slaves poorly, and just by the nature of slavery, that was necessary in a lot of ways, then it reflects how you treat people in society, how you would treat free men, right? It's not like there's these two separate versions of you that deals with your slaves and then your companions, right? It's the same person, and if you treat your slaves, who are human beings, in a certain way, it reflects how you might treat somebody else, right? And so it makes people tyrants. Jefferson also talked about how it's bad for the country as a whole. Jefferson said that we are so wrong on the question of slavery that it is certain that God will punish us if we don't get it right. So, what did the founders do about it? Well, during the founding and early American period, 9 states became free states, states where slavery was illegal. There is also the abolition of the slave trade, which was legally abolished in 1807 and took effect in 1808. Later on, the slave trade was declared to be piracy, which made it a death penalty offense. In regards to the Constitution, you'll notice that absent from the entire Constitution, including the parts that deal directly with slavery, is the word slave in any variation. That's because they specifically chose not to include any racially biased wording. Madison, Frederick Douglass, and Abraham Lincoln all came to the same conclusion about why this was the case. The founders did not want to taint the document with any implication that slavery existed, so that if someone came along in the future and read the original Constitution without any other knowledge of American history, they would not know that slavery had been a part of it. The hope of the founders was that it would gradually be removed from our society. A big argument on the left against the Constitution in early America is in regards to the Three-Fifths Compromise. Now, the Three-Fifths Compromise was not based on racism. In fact, it was never a statement about race. It was a statement about the economic inefficiency of slavery. The truth is that the Constitution's text is racially neutral. The framers used the same word person to refer to humans of all races. They rejected the racial qualifications for voting and holding office that unfortunately were in some state constitutions. Now, the Three-Fifths Compromise addressed 2 issues. 1, the size of each state's delegation in the House of Representatives, and 2, each state's contribution of federal direct taxes. Direct taxes were levies imposed on individual people and on a wide range of items such as property, wealth, income, and professions. The Constitution outlined that every state would have at least 1 representative in the House of Representatives. The Three-Fifths Compromise added that both additional representatives and direct taxes would be divided among states according to their population, and that for these reasons only, each state's population figure would be reduced, to exclude Indians not taxed and to rate each slave as 3/5 of a free person. If you assume that counting people is the best way to go about determining congressional representation, it's easy to see how one could see the Three-Fifths Clause as an expression of racism. However, most of the framers didn't think counting persons was the proper basis for representation. They believed representation should be handed out based on ability to contribute federal tax revenue. This view is reflected in the classic early American war slogan, "No taxation without representation." However, the framers had difficulty trying to find a formula for calculating each state's ability to contribute federal tax revenue. After rejecting several formulas as unworkable, they decided that in the long run, a state's population would be determined by its tax capacity. The framers recognized that on average, slaves produced far less than free people. This recognition had nothing to do with race. It was because slaves of any race could not sell their labor and expertise in the free market. They were stuck in a centralized system, an un-American system. Slavery was one of our country's greatest sins, and the modern-day left-wing argument is that this sin still prevails to this day in many forms of racism. But does it? The two main supposed structures of racism in America today are systemic racism and societal racism. To begin with, we can completely rule out modern-day systemic racism because there is none. There is not a single racist federal law. In fact, it's illegal to even pass them. Federal laws prohibit discrimination based on a person's national origin, race, color, religion, disability, and sex. Secondly, societal racism. People think of this in terms of white people oppressing black people. The thing is, it's not socially acceptable to be racist in our country anymore. And even if it was, white people identify less with their race than any other racial group. According to a survey done by Pew Research, every racial group except for white Americans thinks that race is a very important part of their identity. Only 15% of white Americans thought that race was very important to their identity, the lowest of all groups. For black people, it was around 70%. And for all other racial groups, it was around 50%. Whites have the lowest racial identity of any other group in America. And I think in recent years there has been this push for minorities to view themselves as victims of a racist establishment, and this push has been mainly generated from the progressive left, who like to get their fill of virtue signaling out of the way so that they can view themselves as empathetic human beings. And while yes, black people do have some of the highest poverty rates in the United States, these can largely be attributed to the welfare state and various social programs run by unconstitutional government agencies. And while yes, there have been times throughout U.S. history when the government has done racist things, these injustices occur only when we stray from the Constitution and our founding American principles.